Everybody will take a seat. First of all, I want to recognize Councilwoman McClellan for her dutiful attendance. There's a special award coming her way for this. Obviously, we had hoped for a more, and we had anticipated a more robust attendance today, but things have come up at the last minute for a few people. And then also, we have a couple of vacancies, which we need to, I think a couple of them are on the House side, one of them is on the Senate side, and so we need to kind of turn the fire up on the Speaker and also on the Rules Committee to get those filled so we can actually transact some business. And also, I want to apologize to those of you who are making presentations because of the lack of attendance, but I will say we are being live streamed, so I understand. So people will be watching and listening, and we will have, certainly Councilwoman McClellan and I are going to take notes, and we just won't be able to transact any real business.
Senator Lewis, excuse me, is this, it's being live streamed, is it being recorded for future reference? Yes? Okay, thank you.
And the answer from the clerk's office is yes. All right, first up on our agenda, we have Dr. Troy Hartley with Virginia Sea Grant. Thank you.
Ellen, thank you so much for having us here. Just ready? So, thank you. I want to take a little bit of time and talk about kind of a different perspective, I think, on some of the issues of flooding and sea level rise that we've been facing, and focusing on the opportunities this may present for innovation and economic development, particularly in some rural coastal areas, but also appreciating that some of the challenges we're facing here, we're probably a good decade or so ahead of other parts of the country that will be facing these same things. So solutions and technical solutions that we could arrive at here have some applications and potentially even some commercial opportunities throughout the U.S. and potentially even globally. Let me take a second first to describe what Virginia Sea Grant is. You guys know it pretty well, but for anyone in the audience or anyone watching that may not know us, so Virginia Sea Grant it's built off of the land grant cooperative extension kind of model. We're a federal-state partnership with our federal funding from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and we are university-based. We fund and conduct research, education, communication, outreach activities. We are a multi-university institution, so we are headquartered at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, but all of the universities you see at the bottom there, George Mason, Old Dominion, UVA, Virginia Commonwealth, Virginia Tech, are all members of our organization. We also have competitive research monies that we make available to the state, and at almost about $600,000 a year that we fund a lot of graduate research fellowships. I'm going to come back to that later because we've used those dollars to leverage state funding through the Go Virginia initiative that I'm going to talk about, and it provides some opportunities that I think Sea Grant is uniquely positioned to help. As we think about this from the economic development perspective, and this particular initiative that is funded by Go Virginia, there's a lot of moving parts. So I'm kind of organizing the presentation and discussion around the innovation ecosystem concepts in economic development. So thinking through how you enable innovation and entrepreneurs to be successful, how you provide R&D capacity to work with the private sector to improve on innovations, how you enhance workforce development. And I'm going to focus on one particular dimension of this project. There was a couple pieces funded. There's another independent parallel piece being run by Old Dominion University that's looking at a business consortium and ramping up understanding in the business community about some of these challenges, and potentially often also ramping up demand for services that meet those needs. But I'm not going to present on that here today. That's ODU's piece. So what we did, there's three parts to this. Let me back up and say there's three parts to this presentation that I want to focus on. One is sort of the efforts that we took to really help enable entrepreneurs to get started with our Go Virginia funding, how we leverage those dollars with Sea Grant funding to mobilize the university capacity in the state to work with those businesses, and how we're supporting those businesses as they are pilot testing their innovations on properties in the Middle Peninsula and supporting some of their workforce needs in that process. So the first step in this process, and I know you've heard from Paul Robinson and RISE before about their business plan competition, their very exciting approach to finding innovations in this field. We characterized a set of coastal rural challenges, and RISE ran the competition to find some businesses that were tackling those sorts of problems. These are the three winning firms through that process. Biogenics, a group that's thinking through shoreline stabilization strategies and combining a number of different innovative approaches collectively to enhance our ability to protect our shorelines. Natrix, which is advancing some really innovative, creative 3D printing technology in the field, looking at using dredge material to create blocks that could replace rock in a shoreline situation. Also doing some really innovative things, thinking through what both what that dredge material could be in the block, but also whether those blocks could absorb nutrients in the water column, could have impacts on carbon emissions as well. And then Triangle Environmental, which is a firm that university kind of based out of North Carolina, a lot of Gates funding, Gates Foundation funding in the beginning, thinking about wastewater treatment in a refugee camp situation. But because we put this competition out, they said, well, I'm taking advanced wastewater treatment technology and we're scaling it down to the size of a refrigerator. Maybe that has applications in a coastal rural context where there's a lot of challenges with septic systems and future thinking about what buildings look like on the coast. Virginia Sea Grant, then the next step in this process was matching these businesses and these opportunities and needs with university capacity. So we took $500,000 of those Go Virginia dollars, and we matched that with $500,000 of Sea Grant federal funding. And so it was $1 million challenge on the street for universities to partner with each of these businesses, validate the performance of what they're putting on the table, and also think about what the next generation of some of those ideas might look like. So Old Dominion University, George Mason is working with Biogenics. Natrix, which had a fairly straightforward proposal looking at just the applications of dredge materials in their technologies and their 3D printing, are beginning to think of the next set of questions and are really interested in working with potentially with the Virginia Tech. UVA's been in some of those conversations as well. Triangle Environmental, we have been asking them to think about, if you take your technology that you've essentially taken a septic system and you put it into the context of a refrigerator, and you work with some architects and biologists from JMU, what would the new building of the future look like that's on the waterfront that may have to move off of the waterfront over time, but you've embedded your septic system into the building itself, and it's not an asset that's sitting out in the field. Because we are university-based and federally funded as well, Not Alone Hold Fast is a nonprofit, and they do work on aquatic plant production, an issue that is tremendously important here to meet some of the resilience projects and implement some of the resilience projects that are funded in the state. How do we increase the production and the rate of aquatic plants so that you can have them for these projects? Partnering them with Norfolk State, this is only using Sea Grant dollars. They're a nonprofit, they're not a business, so they didn't win the business competition, but their idea was really important. So leveraging that Sea Grant capacity, we were able to mobilize engineers, architects, biologists, aquatic plant botanists from multiple universities, getting them working with businesses to think about these innovations, and then testing those innovations in the field on properties in the Public Access Authority in the Middle Peninsula. So that's the other element of this collaborative research capacity component of an innovation ecosystem. Let's see if I can. So there are over 50 properties in the Public Access Authority in the Middle Peninsula. These have been private properties that have been donated into the PAA. Virginia Sea Grant and the PAA have an agreement, an MOU in place where Sea Grant's helping them think through how would we manage these as R&D field stations for testing what these new innovative adaptation designs might look like. And as I mentioned, there's over 50 properties in the PAA right now. Probably about 8 or 9 that we're leveraging currently in this particular Go Virginia project. One of the things we don't have, we have field stations. We have universities with multiple sets of capacity. We have the ability to leverage that capacity through some public-private partnership and projects that Sea Grant can fund. But we don't have a location where we could bring those disciplines together with the private sector, put an architect in the room with an engineer, with a landscape architect, with an ecologist, with the private sector, and say, what does the future look like? What does the future of living and working on the waterfront look like 100 years from now? And would you design something differently if you simultaneously thought about the open water, the living shoreline, the landscaping, and the building all together as a single system? And potentially even integrate some smart infrastructure technologies to be monitoring how that new design might look like. That kind of innovation can't quite happen yet in the innovation ecosystem that we have. It could use a location that would bring these folks together to do that. The other component of this project that Sea Grant is funding and leveraging with the Go Virginia dollars is one of the topics that we were hearing from RISE winners in the past, but certainly some of the winners in this competition, is finding that technician level expertise is really hard. So these are new technologies. We're trying to implement new approaches to adapting. Where are we going to get the skilled workforce to be working, to hire? And so we have using and leveraging a work-based learning program, an apprenticeship program with the Rappahannock Community College. We're providing each of these business winners with an apprentice at the technician level, complemented with, I think, enhancing entrepreneurship training in university context, for example, an opportunity to really be leveraging the workforce being generated in the state and supporting these businesses in these collaborative R&D projects. One of the winners of the award, the business plan competition, and has been now partnering with JMU in thinking through the future of what buildings could look like on the waterfront, noted how this initiative is really been, and this partnership that they're working with has really been more than just about the funding. They've really been able to leverage a lot of support and help on all of the components of what they need to move their innovation through to being a successful company. So thinking about that entire economic development innovation ecosystem in this initiative and are positioning ourselves pretty well. This is a firm that was developed out of Duke and is working in North Carolina, but is seeing huge opportunities right here in Virginia and would potentially settle in here. As Virginia Sea Grant looks at how we're helping move this, continue the momentum that this economic development initiative has been building, a couple things I want to flag. There are emerging partnerships. One has been Sea Grant's work with the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation. And in particular, some of their smart testbed technologies developed in the cybersecurity area, but are beginning to think a lot more about what are cost-effective sensors that could be in the field, that could be monitoring everything from sort of smart home technology out to the extended to smart property technologies, and leveraging the PAA properties as test beds for some of the sensors that they are working with, and the companies that are developing sensors in their smart technology opportunity. We are partnering with them and going after a fairly large NSF engines proposal. It's a multi-year, multi-million-dollar initiative, looking at how smart tech comes into this coastal resilience questions. Sea Grant itself, we're seeing, I think in our state, that I mentioned earlier how we don't have too many venues to be bringing those disciplinary perspectives together with the private sector and say, here's our challenge. Get creative and innovative and integrate what you know, architect, engineer, landscape architect, ecologist, and come up with new solutions. There are pieces of that in Virginia. There are many firms that A&E firms and some of the architectural firms, Hanbury, we're working with Hanbury in a lot of their summer internship programming to have them thinking about these design questions on PAA properties. Wetlands Watch, and the nonprofit, has a collaboratory. It's been working in this space for a long time at a community scale. Individual architects in different universities have studios and are beginning to think a little more integrated, but they're not. We don't have the capacity to bring them all together. So we're looking at ways that we might be able to enable that, provide some funding to enable a community practice in the state around that topic, and see if that can be a think tank of innovation in thinking through what the future is going to look like. And in the Middle Peninsula itself, I'm not going to dive deep into this. This is a whole presentation of it in and of itself, and I would encourage you to take a look if you haven't heard about Fight the Flood, or the efforts in the Middle Peninsula to really leverage multiple funding, federal funding, state funding, to start to prop up a demand locally and help subsidize a local demand for some of these resilient services, these adaptation services, so that if in a broader economic development initiative ecosystem, you could be creating the innovation, testing it in the field, and then have some demand right in place to start purchasing some of that, to get them started, to move companies into that successful stage of economic development. And my last slide, and this is only because I've been at these presentations for a while, and you guys often will ask, well, what would you need? What takes this the next step? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that would look like, or at least just to get you thinking. I think in the short term, there's thinking through what it takes to implement some of these projects in a little smoother way. Some of the permit authorities to do R&D permits, because you're experimenting with something that's never been designed before. So what does an R&D permit look like? How does that PAA location get identified potentially as even an R&D zone where you could do these sorts of things, and there is a system in place to help permit those and be monitoring them for ensuring that they are performing as they're intended to and are protective of the water quality in the bay. If you were in a generous mood, I think there's even some planning fund opportunities that could start scoping out what that collaborative R&D hub facility could look like. There's a location in West Point where we're working with Hanbury to even look at renovating an existing garage there as a potential studio space. But that's just a piece of what could potentially be needed. I think in the end of the day, to have that kind of capacity, we're really going to need to go to probably an Economic Development Administration, EDA, get some funding from the federal level. Could be some opportunities in the infrastructure bill monies that are coming through DC right now that could invest in an R&D facility, but I think we'd need the planning dollars up front to see what that facility thoroughly looks like. I think in addition, looking forward to next year and talking to you folks about what a nonprofit authority, a lot like what the Virginia Innovation Partnership Authority and the corporation that implements that looks like to be administering any kind of collaborative research facility. They're much more nimble in the way that they can procure and partner with the private sector. And right now, this has been really being all run off grant funding, competitive grant funding, a shot at a time. So thinking through what it would take to codify that, leveraging a lot of what Virginia Sea Grant brings to the table too in a lot of our staffing. But that could mean something for year one and then out years in implementation. So thank you. Thank you for thinking a little bit about this from the perspective of economic development.
Thank you. What kind of federal funding do you receive?
So our base NOAA funding is $1.9 million a year. That funds, about a third of that goes into our extension programming. We have extension offices at VIMS, at Virginia Tech, and at William & Mary Law School, the VCPC. About a third of that goes towards the administration of the program and including our communication capacity and our ability to run RFPs and solicit funding and proposals from the state, and then another third or so goes into our competitive monies that are available to the state.
What does the Commonwealth give you?
I'm sorry?
What does the Commonwealth give you?
What is the what?
We, Commonwealth of Virginia.
The Commonwealth of Virginia provides some match sources to our extension services, but there's about $140,000 or so in Virginia Sea Grant.
Okay. Councilwoman McClellan, do you have any questions?
Great presentation. I wish that Delegate Hodges was here because I know he's all about innovation in this area, so I'm sure he's seen this presentation as well, or hopefully he'll have a chance to. And I appreciate the collaboration with the universities, and particularly Dr. Paul Robinson, who I see is here from RISE as well. Y'all are doing some great things, so really looking forward to seeing what you're going to do with sensor technology, too, in the future, and AI.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up, we'll have Kyle Spencer, City of Norfolk Resilience Officer, to talk about the storm risk management plan for the City of Norfolk.
Can I advance? Do you advance them or do I need to advance slides? Oh, gotcha. Great. Okay, thank you. All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Lewis and Councilwoman McClellan. Thank you for the opportunity to come talk about this exciting transformational project in the city of Norfolk that we're partnering with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Norfolk District on. At your desk, I left a handout that will cover a lot of the material I'll discuss today. These are some leave-behinds you can take with you, and there's some extras for your colleagues as well. Just let me know if you have any questions about those once we get through the slide deck. So Norfolk and the Norfolk District have been working on this project really since about 2015-16 when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers started the North Atlantic Comprehensive Coastal Study based out of the North Atlantic Division. And in that study, they identified Norfolk as a target area to conduct what's called a 3x3x3 feasibility study. And that's 3 years, $3 million, 3 levels of review. And that's an expedited process to kind of get projects like a coastal storm risk management program through the Army Corps' hopper, if you will, in a way that is a little more efficiently than traditionally, and hopefully get projects done ahead of a disaster versus reacting to disaster programs. And so in 2016, we embarked on that endeavor, created the feasibility report in 2019, and that was then authorized. The recommended plan was authorized by Congress in the 2020 Water Resource Development Act. And then lucky for us, and with a lot of help and effort among our colleagues in DC and around the state, we were able to get ourselves in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act identified as a New START project. And that's a key piece of nomenclature with the Corps, where now the project will be funded to its completion with work plan funding along the way. But the IIJA started the project with $400 million to the Norfolk District as part of the non-federal match. That this program requires a 65%, 35% non-federal, federal match. And so our 35% share to unlock that $400 million is about $215 million. And so we're working with about $615 million to begin the New START program. And I'll take you through how we're going to use that and the timing of this project as we go forward in the presentation. So this is what we're trying to do. If we do nothing, the picture on the left shows what happens to the city of Norfolk and essentially a 100-year storm with sea level rise. We're using the year 2075 because typically you design and construct projects of infrastructure projects with like a 50-year design life. So you're essentially looking at from 2025, which is when we'll start construction, through the life of that project. And when you look at that time frame with sea level rise and a large-scale storm event, that's what you get on the left. And so the slide on the right is showing what we would accomplish through this program by holding back that inundation from the city. Unfortunately, this Civil Works program does not allow for federal DoD facilities to be incorporated in it at this current time. There are some ways that folks are working to get around that, especially in Virginia Beach's kicking off their coastal storm risk management program. And they are including the Oceana Navy base, but unfortunately our project, the way we got ahead of the game here, just wasn't ready to incorporate that, but we are working with the Navy and others to add that back in later, as well as our joint land use study has a lot of recommendations to support mission readiness.
Excuse just a second. I think Councilwoman McClellan has a
Yes,
question.
ma'am.
Yeah, Kyle, I'm sorry, I know the answer, but for those who might not.
Sure.
You just referenced in the slide earlier the $615 million project. I just want to make sure that the slide on the right doesn't reflect $615 million, but more like $2 billion.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So
so
the
just-
next slide
Okay.
has that number,
Got it.
and it is, so to accomplish this, we're looking at a $2.3 billion program for the citywide protection system. Being that it's so large and it takes such a long time, we've had to break it up into what we call separable elements, and so we've sort of ranked those or put those in an order here on the slide, with Area 1 starting with it's in the downtown area, but really it's our first phase is starting to focus on protecting some of our most vulnerable populations, but then working our way around the existing downtown flood wall to eventually protect the critical infrastructure around the hospital complex, as well as a lot of the other communities that are being hit hard with flooding. And then Area 2 is the Pretty Lake area of the city is what we call it, but it'll be a surge barrier at the mouth of the water body with some flanking walls. And I'll go into a little more detail of each of these in a second, but Area 3 is the Lafayette surge barrier. It's the largest surge barrier, and it also is protecting the largest landmass of the city, as well as the majority of the population. About a third of the entire city's population is protected by that one system. And then Area 4 is the Broad Creek surge barrier, also fairly large scale surge barrier. The hatched areas on the map represent where we're doing non-structural, so not every house in this area will be touched by the program, but these are things like house raising, basement filling, floodproofing, that sort of thing for residential and commercial structures in the hatch zones. We have about 1,000 in the recommended plan to work through as part of that, and that program will kind of run continuously with all the other sort of 4 phases shown on the map. We used to kind of call it phase 5, but it's really just going to run continuously. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Maybe a little hard to see here, but again, a lot of this is in this pamphlet. When you look at accomplishing a citywide program like this, it's going to take us at least 10 years. And so we're breaking this thing out and staggering it a little bit so that we, we're not having to come up with our share of the match and other things right up front. But we would like to accomplish the first 3 orange lines on the map. Those represent design phases. The gray lines represent the construction phase of each overall phase of the program. And we'd like to save a little bit of the funding of the 615 to work through a pilot program on the non-structural. We have a lot of historic properties, slab on grade properties, as well as crawl space, and we need to kind of work through all the different nuances of each one, and so that we've got a good game plan moving forward as we scale up for the full 1,000. But you can see the cost of each segment of the project there at the bottom in the graph. These are big numbers. It's a total again of $2.3 billion. The Lafayette surge barrier, for instance, is about $680 million alone. And right now, as the non-federal sponsor of the city of Norfolk, our 35% of that $2.3 billion is currently about $800 million. And so we'd love to to work with the Commonwealth to come in as a cost share partner on this, maybe split that with us 50-50. That's something we've seen in other states and localities around the country, in Louisiana and up in New England. And so the chart sort of identifies how that would break down, but it would basically be around $400 million from the state and the local sponsor, which is the city of Norfolk. And so as we go through the chart at the top again, we're going to work through the design phases in the color boxes, construction in the gray, and we think that $615 million will get us the first 3 lines on the graph, as well as that pilot program there identified at the bottom, just to reiterate that. A little bit more about each kind of phase. So phase 2, the Pretty Lake Surge Barrier, this is just a zoom in map. Everything in the light colored shading in the purple is what's protected by the surge barrier. There's a lot of pump stations and about 20,000 residential properties in this area. Again, the Lafayette Surge Barrier is the largest one. There's, I think, about 40 to 50,000 properties in here, lots of critical infrastructure, pump stations, Old Dominion University, Hampton Boulevard's corridor. This is a key corridor for the Port Authority, as well as our friends at the Navy to access the base, and NIT is also using this corridor quite a bit for their trucks to enter and exit the city of Norfolk as they work out of the terminal there on the north end of the river. And so just to kind of show you what we mean by these surge barriers, that we get a lot of questions on this. I wanted to kind of give you some pictures. And this is what's called a sector gate. So it's a huge piece of infrastructure out in the water, and where there's a navigation channel, in this case there is one, that works its way towards the Norfolk Yacht Club and the Granby Bridge that crosses Lafayette. We'll have this big surge barrier that'll be open all the time, but it will close ahead of a storm, typically at low tide, to create the largest storage basin behind it that you can for the rainfall that we know we get with these big storms. But you can see from the graphic on the right, there's just hundreds of piles, hundreds of feet of infrastructure in the ground and under the water supporting this. And there will be sort of a causeway / wall that will connect the shorelines to this gate. And there will be openings, about 9 of those right now have been identified along this way for the tidal flushing and other types of considerations we have to take into account as far as water quality and environmental conditions. So we want to have small openings along the way that will all be closed when the big storm comes. And then, of course, this big sector gate will be closed off as well. We don't want folks driving around their boats anyway. When we close this thing, it's going to be typically a major storm event with lots of wind accompanying it. And so the Broad Creek Surge Barrier will be a slightly smaller but similar type of protection measure, where we'll close off the mouth of the gate right at 264. And there's a lot of infrastructure behind this. Again, one of our major water treatment plants is back there, and a lot of the city's industrial park. So again, we're going to focus on sort of this, we call it sort of this Ghent to downtown Harbor Park system. But that's somewhat of a misnomer. It's really protecting everything in the orange color here behind the red line. And so that's folks in our Tidewater Gardens community that we're working through the St. Paul's transformation on, as well as the other 2 public housing communities at Young Terrace and Calvert Square. We also have, of course, lots of residential properties. Norfolk State is also protected by this system north of the Ohio Creek project. So we're wrapping up the Ohio Creek project. There on the right, the system will tie into where it leaves off. We'll continue that line of protection to the Berkeley Bridge in Phase 1A. Phase 1B, we'll work our way to the existing downtown flood wall, kind of skip over that because it's providing a lot of benefit now, and then we'll work our way from the downtown flood wall across the Hague mouth, where there'll be a smaller surge barrier, and the flanking walls will work there all the way up to Lambert's Point coal terminal there where the tracks are. That's kind of the high ground. So I'm going to dive in a little bit more about this. We call this the pre-construction engineering design phase in the blue circle. We've been in that phase of the project up until basically till now, and what we're going to hopefully do soon is sign the project partnership agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers next month to codify and unlock that $400 million, codify all the roles and responsibilities on the project, but begin to spend that $400 million. And so this is the social vulnerability index behind this first line of protection. This is something we included in our Community Flood Preparedness Fund grant application that we were just recently awarded $24.6 million from. Much appreciation to DCR and the team up there with Matt Wells and the secretary working with us to get some funding out of that program to bring the state along as part of this project. And we're real excited to bring them in and start partnering on this piece of the project. There is a casino development happening next to Harbor Park. And so we are not necessarily doing that as part of the core project, but we are requiring them to build to the core standard. So we're working very closely with the developer to make sure we tie in nicely with their plan. Zooming in on phase one, A and B here, it's a series of levees and flood walls. There's a couple of pump stations. These are just stormwater pump stations. But when you build this type of infrastructure, there's a lot of other utilities that come into play. So we are having to remove and rework some of our water sewer lines as well as franchise utilities. And we started that coordination already. We are protecting the large substation Dominion Energy runs right there next to the little creek we call Newton's Creek, which the watershed goes all the way underneath the highway up into the St. Paul's area. And so we'll put a pump station and a tide gate there where that yellow square is. And then we're going to tie in again to the Compostela embankments where the Ohio Creek leaves off. And then we work our way through the Berkeley Bridge with this bin wall and these T-walls, and I'll show you what those look like. And eventually we'll work our way around to Town Point Park. We'll try to, where we have the horizontal space on the ground, we'd like to do levees and more of a green type of infrastructure. And so that's what the green lines represent here. Can't really probably read this here. Again, this is in your pamphlet, but this is just a description of each type of those elements. And we can make these slides available as well, but sort of describes a little bit about each type of feature that we're incorporating in this first phase. And I'm happy to walk you through those. Here's what those pictures look like. So when we talk about a T-wall, it's basically an upside down T. The current downtown flood wall is what's called an I wall. The Corps doesn't like to do those anymore if they're taller than 6 feet above the existing ground. And so we're going to eventually replace the existing wall with a T-wall, but until then, the T-wall is substantially more involved in an I wall. There's these battered piles, these that are angled, that come off of each side, and those create a large footprint that's required for our easement and real estate for the operations and maintenance of the project. And so in some areas, especially in the core downtown, we don't have that kind of space. We have buildings we have to keep in mind. So we're doing this kind of a new thing for the Corps, at least here in this district, where it's a bin wall. It's basically like a tube that's filled. And the batter piles are only on the riverside, so we can protect the foundations of the existing Waterside and Sheraton Hotel, as well as the other buildings along there. And this is a crude graphic of a levee, but this is essentially an earthen structure that has a clay core which prevents the water from seeping through it. These are the bin wall and the levee are nice because they allow us to co-locate our trails. Elizabeth River Trails, important asset of the city. We can co-locate that on top of the bin wall as well as the levee, and where these sort of parallel each other today. This is a rendering of what that kind of bin wall looks like behind Waterside. I'm not sure if you wouldn't be able to see it anyway, but basically there's openings in the concrete wall that's kind of running along the pathway, and those are either going to be glass or what we call stop logs. So they'll be open all the time, so you can see and walk around, see through the windows of the buildings. But when the big storm comes, we'll drop in these slats into these prefabricated slats on the concrete, bring in these metal structures to create that barrier. That's really only going to be at the real catastrophic hurricane level. The top of the wall that you're walking on here is about 11 feet elevation, and the top of the total line of protection is 16.5. So, so it'll be like basically like a waist-high type wall that you'll be walking next to with openings, and then, of course, those will get closed off ahead of a storm. We wouldn't want you walking around out there anyway during the storm event. But you can see it kind of elevates the entire promenade. Here's a rendering of kind of how it snakes underneath the Berkeley Bridge. Obviously, there's a lot of coordination with the Virginia Department of Transportation to do this type of project, but the bin wall will kind of work its way through and then transition to the levee. And then out in front of that levee, we'd like to build living shorelines, similar to how we've done Ohio Creek, where we have these lines of protection. So we've got living shorelines and oyster reefs, creating good habitat and knocking down the waves before they get to the structure. And then the levee is the main line of protection with the trail on top of it.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
As much as I love every detail of this project, I think because we've got a couple of other presentations, we might want to get to the money ask.
Yeah, okay. I'm almost there, yep. One more rendering, and then again, just how future development is incorporated in the big plan. We're very strategic about how we're doing that with the Blue Greenway as well and St. Paul's transformation. And this is kind of my final slide, but so the next step, so we're working on that project partnership agreement, which we hope to sign in early March of 2023. That green lights the Corps to begin working, unlocking their funding. We've already got about half of our $215 million with help from the state's 24.6, as well as we have a capital improvement program of $35 million for the next 2 years, and hopefully every year after that, about $40 million. And again, so we're looking to eventually come to terms with the Commonwealth. We've been talking with the administration a little bit, beginning to plan out conversations with their delegation and others up here to put some money into an appropriation type format where we have funding brought in straight into the project without the strings attached to like loans and grants and things. But wherever we can come in with the state on that, we'd love to begin that conversation with you all. For more information about the project and its impact and how things are going, just go to resilientnorfolk.com. That's a live website now that we will keep everything updated on. So I'll pause there, see what questions you have or anything I can clarify.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Do you have any questions, sir?
No, thank you, Kyle. I just wanted to highlight in this handout the 2.3 billion, excuse me, with a B. You're looking at the 35% match would be City of Norfolk and the state. So city would be 402 million, 403 million, round up.
Right.
And the Commonwealth of Virginia, 403 million.
Yeah.
And we've received 24.6 million so far?
Yeah, so far from the state, right. Okay. And the city's got about 70 million in our CIP already allocated. So we're, floating around 100 million to begin. But, it is, we still have a ways to go, obviously.
You mean 100 million from us?
No, 24 million so far from the state.
Well, I know that, but in addition, what, during this budget year?
Yes. Well, I don't know if we haven't specifically asked for that amount exactly, but we'd love to start that conversation somewhere around that number.
Is there, Senator Lewis, do you have some news to announce?
Yeah.
Is there 100 million in this budget?
I think coming in with asking for 400 is not realistic, obviously, but yeah, if there is a magic number we can work towards, that's the conversation we're starting to have.
Okay, all right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Kyle. Dr. Lukenbach, Virginia Wetlands Update.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. Although I do have to say, when I got an invitation at the end of last week to give a wetlands update, there's a lot of things to update you on wetlands, and I'm not going to go through lots and lots of slides to do that at this point. A few emails and phone calls got some clarity. At least what I was being asked for in this case was some recent update on some recent work that's been completed by researchers at VIMS. And I certainly would have brought the experts along with me, but it was short notice, and they would have talked too long. and put up partial differential equations, and you'd have a sense that it's really good cutting-edge research, but it wouldn't have made a lot of sense. So what I'm going to do is provide a summary of some recent work by Dr. Matt Kerwin and his colleagues and students at VIMS. That is what spawned, at least there's the interest in that. Now, there's other aspects of wetlands updates that I can give you if you want to ask for it. You can go to do I have control of the slides? Okay, which is probably that way. Okay, this goes back a little bit further than what I think was originally being asked for, but I want to point out, I'm really going to focus on things that came from two relatively recent extensive studies, multi-year studies, that cover the tidal marshes in Maryland and Virginia that drain into the Chesapeake. Well, it also includes the seaside of the Eastern Shore. But the data that I'm going to give you are Chesapeake Bay specific. The first is looking backwards. This was a study published in 2018 in a peer-reviewed journal, the result of quite a few years of work. It used historical topographic maps that were available from 1846 to 1912. These are known as the USGS T-sheets, as they were called, and they included pretty broad categories of land use type, including marshes, farmland, and forest cover. And where we had good examples of those and could confirm them, and there wasn't a lot of uncertainty, those were used. They represented, the good ones that went through the screening represented 25% of the modern Chesapeake Bay tidal wetlands. That's in Maryland and Virginia. So that's a lot. And the numbers that you'll see on this slide, you could basically multiply, it's up by 3 to get what we think is a good estimate of tidal wetlands, historic area. So I switched theirs from, actually they did it in square kilometers, but I put it in acres. During that time period, from 1846, to the modern stuff that we use came from both the state of Virginia and the state of Maryland's aerial photography and mapping. So it's pretty high resolution, but there are other steps to go that are higher res. So during that time period, again, in the Maryland and Virginia jointly, we lost over 23,000 acres to erosion and sea level rise. But during that same time, we gained almost 25,000 acres were created through marsh migration. So there's been no net loss of tidal wetlands in the Chesapeake watershed in the last 160 years. I mean, there have been some places that have been losers and some places that have gained. And if you want to, again, multiply those by 3, you'll get not just the 25% that we had good historic data on, but what we believe is a reasonable estimate for how much was lost and how much was gained. But that's just to put this, and where's it being gained from? Well, it's being gained from the conversion mostly of coastal forest to wetlands as sea level has risen, which it has done gradually over that period. And to a lesser extent, but also farmland. So that the gain in wetlands and the no net loss of wetlands is come at the loss of other habitats, other uses. With that as background, I think this is the study that a few people are starting to hear about in Virginia. It made quite a splash when it got published. Attempt to identify the potential migration corridors for tidal marshes in Maryland and Virginia based on elevation and different sea level rise scenarios. And we use a wide range of sea level scenarios that go all the way from just a half a meter in height, which we'll get to in a couple of decades, to 2.5 meters, which is really on the high end for where we might get by 2100. So I think of this as the bottom of that's too low and the top is probably too high. And so this was published in 2022. It just so happens that in 2022, when the draft 1 of the Coastal Master Plan came out, it identified as one of the data gaps understanding where marshes might migrate or what could be migration corridors. well, these folks have been working on it for 5 years, and I've got a real high-level summary of what they found to show you. First is, not surprising, some of it seems common sense, that flat, low-lying areas have large future marsh area potential. I mean, they've got a lot of potential loss of what other uses, but that's where the marshes are going to go where they can. But it's not all just rural. I'm going to show you things that highlight what's, I'm assuming this is the pointer. Yeah, it doesn't show up on there. But if you look at the one box that's near Mobjack Bay and the mouth of the York River, and another box that's up on the Rappahannock River, you see real differences because that part of the Rappahannock River's got a much steeper slope. We're going to zoom in on both of those there. Similarly, it's not all a matter of rural versus developed or urbanized, because even when you look here at parts of Virginia Beach and Norfolk, there are, there are places, even where we've got a lot of developed infrastructure, where there's still room for marshes that are marsh corridors. And what I want to say about these plots, and where those, again, this big paper with lots of stuff in it, but what's plotted here, and you can see the scale under different sea level rise scenarios, is where marshes would migrate now before they ran into a barrier. And maybe the good news in one level out of this is that the majority of those barriers are topographic. They're not anthropogenic. Roughly 80% of the barriers to marsh migration, I don't mean in number, I mean in area of marsh. When we look at, when they stop because they can't migrate any further. There's either a barrier that we made or the topography's too high. And so this one I did break down to have some Virginia specific numbers. For Virginia, those two ranges of currently unobstructed or marsh migration corridors range from 120,000 acres to over 430 acres, depending upon the sea level range that happens. Again, with most of it being topographically restricted. It's I'm just going to do this really quickly, but hopefully there's time for questions and I can answer other things that you might have about a marsh update. The really relevant take-home here, I think, is that, despite some impacts to tidal wetlands over the past, despite direct impacts to tidal wetlands over the past century and a half, we haven't seen any net loss in that time frame. The Virginia Coastal Master Plan, as I said, identified the identification, that's a bad sentence, of migration corridors for tidal marshes as an important data gap. And this work that we've just completed has gone a long ways towards doing that. But I think the other thing to think about is the currently anthropogenic structures only restrict about 20% of tidal marshes to migrate within the region. It seems really likely, we're going to build more barriers because we got more, the sea level rise rate is increasing. We're going to have more infrastructure to protect. Just had a clear, a nice talk by Kyle about that. But when we do that, because we're going to need to do that, not just in urban areas, but in suburban and in certain parts of rural areas, what we should be doing is be mindful of providing some new new corridors for those marshes to migrate, because we don't want to lose them. We don't want to lose them for the coastal resilience they provide. We don't want to lose them for the water quality benefits, habitat benefits, et cetera. But the other point where I think there's really opportunity, it turns out that a lot of diverse things represent anthropogenic barriers to marsh migration. Sometimes it's clear things that we got to protect. We're going to protect those. Some of them are put down here. There are a number of things that we believe, and they need to be better mapped, a more detailed map, and identified, and and determine which ones are easy to remove, cost-effective, that they're socially acceptable to remove or mitigate for these, such as there's a lot of old 19th century berms in various places that probably were intended to stop marshes from migrating onto a particular farm, which is now no longer a farm, and they're not big enough to keep the water from coming in from behind them. But I think this is a really interesting next step. It's in line with what the Coastal Resilience Master Plan called for. We've got some work to do to get some fine detailed identified about which ones of these are which ones are reasonable to remove or mitigate. Maybe a culvert in a few places. How many acres do you get if you do that? What do you get by removing berms that aren't serving the function needed anymore in terms of trying to continue to give these barriers for marshes to migrate? And I think the other part of that is, with obviously no disrespect to living shorelines and other shoreline stabilization, which we are very active in promoting, doing, and helping to do, and that are an important part of shoreline management right now in the state. But because locally that's good for habitat and locally it's good for water quality. The big picture for the coastal resilience with these marshes is to pay attention to where these corridors are. I think one final point, because it shouldn't do this without saying what the big unknown is. Obviously, we lost marshes to erosion in the last 160, and sea level rise in the last 160 years. But the migration was able to keep up with it, and this work goes a long ways to say where barriers get in the way. There is a tremendous amount of debate and uncertainty among the science leaders in this area as to when does sea level rise rate get so fast that even if you've got migration corridors, the marshes can't keep up. And I mean, it's a huge range. It's an area of active research, and we don't know for sure. But I will say there won't be one number, because the most important thing there, besides the rate of sea level rise, is the sediment supply. And that's different in different places. So we don't, that's the one end that the science right now has got a tremendous amount of uncertainty in this. So I can't imagine I hit all of the things that you want to ask about a wetlands update, and I'm happy to do any other pieces. This is just the feedback I got on Friday afternoon, and so it's what I put the numbers together for this weekend.
Yeah, that was a great presentation, Mark. Thanks a lot for that. Councilwoman McClellan, do you have any questions?
No, but I learned a lot. How do you say it? Anthropogenic?
Yeah, human made, sorry.
That's all. It's all good. It doesn't fit in my Wordle, unfortunately. It's more
Okay,
than,
got it.
Thanks.
So I avoided, I guarantee you, if the people who'd done this work they'd had partial differential equations up there, you'd seen models built and all of that. So I'll use human built infrastructure. All right.
Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome.
All right, Mr. Director, Matt Wells, going to give us an administration update.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Councilwoman. Happy New Year. It's a pleasure to be back before you all today. Talk a little bit about what DCR is doing and touch a little bit on some of the administration initiatives that we think are coming down the pike this year or this session. So before I get into it, I do want to kind of frame things the way that I typically do, which is sharing our principles for Resilient Virginia in terms of how we approach these programs, which is principle one, we're committed to addressing these challenges. Second principle, that we must address these challenges with programs that work for all impacted parts of Virginia. That the programs that we implement have to work together as parts of comprehensive, cohesive plans, and that as we do all of this, we need to develop and implement it with transparency and input from the public. So we have been very busy since I talked to you all, I think, in early October. We held our second meeting of the Coastal Technical Advisory Committee in December. As we did with the first meeting, we live streamed it to allow for a larger audience. We covered a number of things, updated on the status of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. We had previously put the first phase of the master plan and the framework out for public comment, even though they had already been adopted. We thought this would be a good exercise as we tee up phase two, and we got some really great comments back, and appreciate everybody that shared that. In addition, we got feedback from the TAC as well, and then we worked to establish some subcommittees to help make the work of the group a little bit more manageable. Everything's posted on Town Hall for folks that want to review the TAC's work, and then we are looking at March of this year for the next quarterly meeting, location TBD. It's still our goal to get this thing out of Richmond when we can, so we're hunting down a location and may be able to do that pending an on-time adjournment, we hope, from the General Assembly. We also put out the Community Outreach and Engagement Plan for public comment. This was a requirement of the statute that we put together this plan to help serve the Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 2 and what I'll just call the statewide flood plan because it's shorter. So we have designed this to be a framework for a whole community approach to outreach that's going to allow us to involve a much larger group of stakeholders, impacted parties in the development of the plans. Essentially, our goal here is to get beyond the TAC. The folks that participate in the TAC are very valuable. They're the subject matter experts. We understand that there are a lot of people that are impacted by this and have input to share that don't necessarily show up to these meetings, and so we want to make sure that we have a method to go to them. So what we have posted is a very broad framework of the types of outreach activities that we anticipate conducting, the approach that we want to take to them, and we look forward to, as we work with our partners in developing phase 2 of the plan, filling that in. It may be one group that helps support this. It may be multiple groups. So we understand that everybody's kind of got a little bit different role to play on this. This is also posted for comment on the Town Hall website through the end of the month. We did send an email solicitation to a very broad range of stakeholders for comment. There were specific groups that were identified in the code that we should consult with on this, and so we specifically wanted to reach out to them to ask for their input, and that went out concurrent with posting on the website. We are also looking forward to the first meeting of the Resilience Coordination Working Group. We've had a lot of work behind the scenes on this. As a reminder, this is an administrative effort, and I'm sorry this is a little bit of an eye chart of a slide, but I'll go over it. This is an administrative effort, but it's an outgrowth of legislation from the 2022 session that started life as the Virginia Resilience Authority was turned into a study along the way, and we just decided ultimately that we don't need legislation, that we could do this on our own. So the working group is designed to essentially, I won't read through all of that, that's what was in the charge letter that tracks with the legislation, but essentially we want to get to how can we work better together as state agencies on a programmatic level? How can we coordinate better with our funding programs? And then how do we work better with our federal and local partners to address these issues, particularly where there's opportunities to draw down federal funds? I'm pleased to say that VCU's Performance Management Group will facilitate, thanks to the generous support of ODU's ICAR. They got a little bit of money in the budget this past year to help support resilience efforts, and they've been kind enough to help support the work of this group through that pot of money. So very much appreciate that. The first meeting we've got scheduled for the end of the month. We anticipate meeting monthly with that group and reporting out both to the administration and to the legislature at the end of November. Let's talk a little bit about funding support, which I imagine is of interest to some folks in this room. When I last spoke with you, we had announced the first wave of grants from the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, round 3. We initially advertised around for $40 million. We later expanded it to $70 million. We got 64 applications for nearly $93 million. The first wave of awards were 27 awards that totaled $13.6 million. We then put 32 proposals that totaled about $68 million in asks into a supplemental review. The purpose of the supplemental round was to allow us to engage directly with grant applicants on a level playing field. We didn't want to pick and choose which folks we went back out to, so we wanted to provide a broad opportunity. And the ultimate goal was that we could fund deserving projects in this round rather than push them to a future round. I want to thank our team who did a tremendous job reviewing all these applications, which are, some of them are very, very complicated. We met with multiple applicants, some of them a couple times, to help refine their applications, to provide them with additional information. And I think at the end of the day, we got a very good product out of it, and I'll go into a little bit of a breakdown of what got funded. We did get 20, so not all of the applicants resubmitted by the November 30 deadline. Some of the applicants chose to consolidate applications, and so we got 24 submitted for review. We announced that we would fund 22 awards for $51.7 million at the end of this year. And as with the first wave of everything, all the resubmitted applications and the scoring is posted on our website, consistent with our commitment to transparency on this. So broadly speaking, where did the funding go? 63% of the funds went to low-income geographic areas. This far exceeds the 25% that we are required to direct to these areas in statute. You can see here the general breakdown. Obviously, some big hitters there on the low-income side in the nature-based and the hybrid solutions, leveraging a significant amount of match for total project funding of $81.1 million. All right, this is another eye chart. Oh, sorry. Yes.
What does the match mean?
The match is the local match.
So the 24.6 million, which is the Norfolk project we just heard from, the match, you're just saying that Norfolk's going to match it?
So that is so they talk about the city coming in at 17.5 and the state coming in at 17.5. So that is what we have down there for the match.
Yeah, we have 70 million, but that's not really, okay, but that's how you list it as a match. Got it, thanks.
So this is really an eye chart. Sorry about that. Wanted to highlight a couple of things here. Again, this is just for the supplemental round. A couple of things that I want to note here. We were able to fund all of the submitted products or projects that met the requirements of the grant manual for this round. We didn't fund everything in its entirety or as they submitted it necessarily, but we took the position that if a project met the requirements as it was submitted, we would fund those portions, again, consistent with wanting to support projects where we can. Not all projects that were placed in the supplemental round resubmitted information, as I noted, so there was a little bit of drop-off, some self-selected out, and then we had one project that did not meet the $50,000 minimum grant threshold for projects after all of the adjustments with the applicant, and so that one dropped off. So a couple of things that I want to flag here. Obviously, Norfolk's flood protection project, which you heard about in great detail. Here, pleased to support that one at $24.6 million. The purchase of Mayo Island by the City of Richmond was funded at $7.5 million. Mayo, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the last privately owned island in the James River Archipelago in the city. It's about 14 acres. About half of that is paved or covered with buildings. And so this is funding for the city to purchase that, to remove the impervious surface, and to return it to a more natural state that will have public access. So pretty pleased for that. This project is also getting a Virginia Land Conservation Foundation grant for $1.5 million. You can see here that Fairfax had a number of projects that were funded as well. And then we also chose to fund a handful of individual private property mitigation projects in this round, which is a change from previous rounds. But you will recall that one of the guiding principles for programs that I mentioned is that they work for everyone, and that means to me meeting needs that are identified by the community. And in this instance, these were projects that were put forward by the Middle Peninsula as part of their Fight the Flood resilience plan that Dr. Hartley talked about. They met the requirements of the grant manual in terms of activity and minimum funding, and so we determined that it was appropriate to fund them in this round. In the future, we may choose to fund these types of projects from the revolving fund, but the CFPF is the program that we have today, and consistent with how we treated the other projects in the supplemental round, we'd rather support projects that are meritorious now rather than waiting for the future. So in total, across round three, we provided over $65 million in funding to 49 projects, of which about 65%, or just a little less than 2/3, will go to low-income geographic areas. And across the three rounds, we have provided just shy of $98 million, again, the majority of which goes to low-income geographic areas. So looking ahead, what's next? Legislative session, we anticipate being a busy one. The governor's proposed budget contains a significant amount of funding for resilience, $211 million in total. That includes $1 million that would be housed in the Secretary's Office for Resilience Coordination across the Commonwealth. This would support ongoing efforts to develop strategies and policies to coordinate and implement flood resilience across the Commonwealth. That includes supporting the work of the Resilience Coordination Working Group. As I mentioned, right now we're leaning on ODU's ICAR for facilitation support. This would help support those efforts from its own pot of money. There is $11 million for flood assistance for Buchanan and Tazewell. That doesn't flow through DCR, but wanted to flag it here for you all. DCR has been proposed to get 3 new dam safety engineer positions. Those will be non-generally funded through federal infrastructure dollars. Right now we have 5 dam safety engineers. They cover 2,600 dams across the Commonwealth. That's probably not, that's not a great number. So this would help out with that a little bit. So very pleased that the governor was able to include that in his budget. And then $200 million deposit to the Resilient Virginia revolving fund. $100 million of that is contingent on fiscal 23 revenues meeting or exceeding estimates. This is in addition to the $25 million for the revolving fund that was in the adopted budget. But the purpose of this is to allow the revolving fund to truly revolve and to serve as a perpetual source of funding for resilience need. And I'll dig into that a little bit in future slides. On the legislative side, we anticipate putting forward legislation to adopt state floodplain standards. This would codify a requirement in Executive Order 45 that DCR develops a statewide standard for development activities in the floodplain by state agencies or on state land. So this only applies to a specific subset of activities. This is something that FEMA is looking for as a part of our participation in the National Flood Insurance Program. The legislation provides the framework for the standard, but it does not codify the standard, but it directs DCR to complete the adoption of it later this year. So for CFPF round 4, we have not landed on a number right now, but our intention is to have a draft grant manual out for public comment in this quarter of calendar 23, and then to open applications in the second half of the calendar year, so early fiscal 24. From there, we would move this program to an annual basis by fiscal year. One thing I want to clarify here, and again, we can dig into this a little bit more in a second, the money for the revolving fund is not meant to replace the CFPF. It's meant to supplement it. We have proposed plussing up the revolving fund because there's a limited amount in it right now, whereas the CFPF still has funds available to it and will continue to get some funds available through our withdrawal from RGGI, and then we'll be able to have a conversation about where those funds come from in the future. Once you back out all of the obligations on the fund right now, that includes funds that we've set aside for future planning and staffing for the next several years, grant awards to date, the initial funding for the revolving fund, phase 1 of the CRMP contract, and then staff support. We've got right now about $78 million in unallocated funds, and there will be, we anticipate, several additional auction rounds before we withdraw from RGGI. So based on this, we are comfortable that we'll have ample funding available for the program at least through fiscal 25, which again will allow for time for the discussions about the funding post-RGGI. And then for the revolving fund, round 1, the amount there is TBD. And I want to talk a little bit about how we anticipate these programs working together. One of our main goals going forward is to craft these programs so that they do complement each other. We've been working with our partners at the Virginia Resources Authority. I want to thank them for their support in sketching out the revolving fund. Our intent is to have both of the manuals go out for public comment together, potentially as a joint manual, and have a joint application period, because to us these are kind of two sides of a coin. We want people to see what funding sources are available for what project, to pick the option that's right for them, to show that we've got a couple of tools in the toolbox now. So this is a little bit of a breakdown from the statutory perspective of where the programs are sort of pointed. Both programs have a tremendous amount of flexibility for project types in their authorizing language. Both of them can offer grants and loans, but if you look at them, they are kind of targeted at different areas. Generally, the CFPF is geared towards larger community scale projects, as the name implies, and here are some of the categories that are listed in the code, and that generally tracks with some of the categories that we have had to date. The revolving fund is more of a property, what I call a property scale program. That's not to say that the CFPF can't fund property projects and the revolving fund can't fund bigger projects, but again, if you look at the statutory language, the revolving fund is directed at the hazard mitigation of buildings, real property, home buyouts and relocations, loans and grants to people for hazard mitigation and infrastructure improvement projects for resilience purposes, and then projects that are identified in the statewide and the coastal master plan. There are a couple of distinctions. The CFPF has a preference for nature-based projects in the statute. It has the requirement that 25% of the awards go to low-income areas. The revolving fund has a preference for projects that will utilize private industry and or serve 2 or more local governments, and it has a specific carve-out for the hazard mitigation of buildings, although it does not specify how much that carve-out is. So this is a very broad, I think, look at where these funds are pointed right now. We're going to continue to develop these distinctions going forward as we craft the grant manuals. So both these funds can offer grants and loans, and so I wanted to just very quickly touch on what that looks like. Here you can see an example of cumulative project funding for a program that has a $10 million capitalization. And again, thanks to VRA for their support on this and for providing this information. So essentially, if you have a grant-only scenario with a 50% match, you could leverage that for a $20 million project in year 1. That's great, but you are done. By contrast, if you look at loan scenarios, by the 10th year of the program, you're actually able to, even if you don't put additional funds in by reinvesting the loan repayments, you're actually able to leverage more money over the long run than you are with the grant program. Now, I understand that all things being equal, most people would probably say they take the grant, but depending on how you structure match requirements, how much of a project you are able to support from a fund, a loan may actually wind up being more financially advantageous for the applicant. I also want to talk a little bit about the different funding scenarios and dig into how much of a difference each additional dollar into a revolving program makes at the beginning of the program. Here, this is the impacts of compounding. They're powerful. So here we've got 2 scenarios. The one on the left, as you're facing the screen, shows, one program that gets $100 million in initial capitalization, one that gets $200 million. They are both giving out 10-year loans at 2.5% interest, and they both assume that you are putting $50 million on the ground for the initial capitalization as you're able. So for $100 million, you put $50 million out in year 1, $50 million out in year 2, and for the $200 million, you do that again in year 3 and in year 4. So over 10 years, the $100 million, if you look at the cumulative funding graph, turns into over $200 million in total project funded, but the $200 million turns into $380 million. So that means that by providing the extra money up front, you get not only the benefits of the extra $100 million, but you get another 70 on top of that. But I think the benefits become even more telling when you look at the annual funding. So in the $100 million scenario, you can see that's the orange line. You can see a pretty significant dip there at the beginning. That's because most of these loans don't start to repay for 2 years after you start. So you have that dip, and then it starts to creep back up as people make interest payments on the loans, and we're able to reinvest that out. And so by year 10, with a $100 million start, you've got just shy of $20 million that you're able to give out in that year. By contrast, with the $200 million scenario, you flatten out that dip a little bit, but by year 10, you've got almost $36 million that you can put back out into the program. And then that will continue to grow. The disparity would continue to grow as the programs grow. And again, this is assuming that you don't have any additional money flowing in. So those early dollars make a significant difference. And there's any number of ways that you can slice and dice that. But the value of the early dollars here, I think, is what we really want to illustrate. So looking ahead and wrapping up, we're going to continue to refine the new CFPF and the initial revolving fund structures, a number of things that we're looking at. What's the appropriate combination of grants and loans? What are the appropriate loan terms, loan rates? How's that structured? What type of projects are we going to fund? What pot of money do they get funded from? What funding amounts are available? So for instance, how much do we put into the building hazard mitigation set aside? How are we going to define community scale in a way that works for all communities? Right now, I know that's been particularly challenging for rural communities. The way that the definition right now is based on a census block. For some areas, that's very small. For some areas, that is half of the county. So we want to make sure that, again, consistent with our principles, that we have programs that work for everyone. We want to talk about what sort of requirements that we're going to put in place for local government programs that work with the revolving fund. There is specific language in the statute about programs at the local level to provide low-interest loans or grants to persons in the Commonwealth eligible for projects for resilience purposes. These programs have to meet the approval of DCR, which I think is going to be important when you look at smaller dollar projects and how we fund those. We simply don't have the capacity at the state level to be reviewing, a whole 100, 200, $3,000 projects, and yet that may be where the demand is, and so we want to make sure that we are meeting that need. As I mentioned before, both of these manuals will go out for public comment, and then last but not least, we still intend to establish an advisory review committee for the grant and loan programs consistent with our commitment to transparency. So that was a lot of talking. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great presentation. Thanks for the update. Let me ask you, the Resilience Coordination Working Group, they're still meeting?
So
The Resilience Coordination Working Group?
So the first meeting of that group will be at the end of January.
Oh, it has not met yet?
It has not met. The coastal TAC has met several times, but the coordination working group has taken us a little while to stand up.
Okay. But I think the authority bill's been reintroduced, has it not?
I haven't seen it yet, but I'll take a look at it. But I think our intention is to continue to have those conversations.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that group will meet on the 31st. You're welcome to attend if you want.
I'll try to.
Okay. It'll be virtual, so we understand it's in the middle of session, and so that will pull a lot of people's time.
Okay. All right. Any questions?
I have a few.
Sure.
I guess I'll start with the last slide, and you talked about local governments. In terms of the revolving loan fund, do you see then a local government taking a tranche of money and then administering it? And would that go to our general obligation debt load? Because that would be a problem for municipalities.
I think we're looking at a number of options. Block action could be one of them. We want to get a little bit better of an understanding about the impact that might have on locality debt limits, but you could look at potential block grant programs, block loan programs. At the end of the day, there is, in addition to our capacity to review applications and to review them thoroughly, there are limits. There are lower limits to the amount of loan that the state is probably properly engaged with. I don't think we want to be in the business of giving out $5,000 loans, and so I think there's probably a role for the locality or some other organization to play.
We don't typically give out $5,000 loans either.
Yeah, so I think that's a conversation that we want to have, because I do think, just based on some of the applications that we saw and weren't able to fund this time, that you will see a need for some of those projects.
And there's $25 million that's been in there allocated as of July 1st, and none of that money has been utilized so far?
That's correct. We have not operationalized the program yet. Yeah. We were focused on getting this round of the flood fund done.
No, I appreciate that, and in preparation for this meeting, I was going back to the letter that you sent on April 26th to Senator Lewis and to the rest of the commission, which was great, and I really appreciate your dedication to transparency. In that time, you were talking about grant round 4 and creating a review panel to assist in the evaluation of these. Is this, where does that stand, and what does that look like at this point?
So we still intend to do it. That was we don't need to pull the slide back up, but that was the last bullet on the slide, was establishing that. So I think more to come on that.
So that's not this resilience work group that it's separate
that's a
from
separate
that?
thing. Yes,
And
ma'am.
is that going to be, are you doing that in advance of the next round of both of those, the revolving loan and the CFPF?
Our intention is to have that group review and advise on both the grants and the
And there will
loans.
only be one round annually at this point?
One round per year, yes, ma'am. That's our intention at this
Okay.
point.
And in that revolving loan fund, will you be able to utilize federal monies to go into that, for example, from the Storm Act?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
And
Awesome.
I think we would look to, one of the factors we may consider is how you're using that money to leverage other money. Certainly what made the Norfolk project so attractive was that money was leveraging a tremendous amount of federal dollars.
And I apologize. I guess I've never been an applicant personally, so I didn't know the match requirement. I mean, Senator Lewis and I both looked at each other and thought, we've never heard about a match requirement. We didn't know that was part of the grant program.
The match requirement varies depending on the type of project, whether you're low income or not. That's not the 50-50 match there isn't the requirement. The requirement is actually lower. We were factoring in the Norfolk's comments about the state coming in at 17.5 and them coming in at 17.5.
Okay.
So if we need to revise that, we certainly
So
can.
one of the, you had a lot of information in those slides, which was great, and I was really pleased because I've been wondering where the money was, right? And, I have a business background, others do, and, typically we look for a pro forma and a business plan, and we're starting to get there. We're 2 years in, I think of this as sort of being a startup, and we're starting to get there. But you have $30 million that is set aside, is it 30 or 31, for future staffing, for plans. In the legislation for the CFPF, I don't recall there being money from the CFPF going to staffing. Where does that say that?
So that money is for a number of things. The largest portion that we have kind of mentally set aside for that is for the Coastal Resilience Phase 2 and for the statewide plan, which is specifically authorized in previous legislation along with support for that. So there's staffing support for that. There is some money in there for staffing support for the CFPF, which we have interpreted the existing statute to allow for us. We have an agreement with VRA that was blessed by the previous administration that allows the
Is there an
department.
MOU there?
I can get to the documentation on it.
Okay, I'd like to see that. Yeah, I saw the 3.1 million for the coastal.
Yeah, so that is it.
plan.
That was contract. That's the contract on that for the phase 1.
So that 30 million will take you for years what? Is it going, for the next year, it's going to cost $30 million
Nope,
for
sorry.
staffing and planning?
And it's on the slide, but it was in like 3-point font. That's through fiscal 26.
Okay, so the good news is we're going to have auctions and auctions and auctions up until then. So right now we have,
I don't know about that, but we'll have at least a couple more rounds of
so
auctions.
right now we have, by my accounting, we have about $112 million remaining. That takes $25 million out for the coastal, the revolving fund, and it takes into account all of the auctions to date. It doesn't take into account the $3.1 million for the plan, the $30 million set aside, or the staffing of the 832.
So the 3.1 is spent.
Okay,
So that was for phase 1. That was a contract with Dewberry.
got it.
They are still doing a little bit of additional work that was a part of the contract, but we anticipate looking afresh as we start phase 2 of the master plan and the statewide plan. So the 3.1 is already spent, and I know it's a little confusing the way we've got it laid out, but I tried to generalize it enough to fit on the slide. So the 3.1 is spent, is allocated. That was a contract that has been signed and is reaching its conclusion. The 30 is our best guess at what we think the future work will require going through 26, which again, the vast majority of that is the second phase of the Coastal Resilience Plan and then the statewide plan. It includes the community outreach and engagement efforts that fit within those plans. I don't want to I didn't spend a lot of time talking about them today. I've talked about them previously. I don't want to undersell how significant those efforts are going to be. They're going to be massive efforts, and so I would rather block off right now more than we perhaps need and not, come up short if we.
No, and
go out of
I
contract.
really appreciate that because the first master plan was a gargantuan effort with hardly any staff and any money. So I appreciate that you're going to do this with the appropriate funding. I just have never seen that dollar amount before, and the staffing piece is still a little bit confusing to me because I
I'm
don't
happy
think
to
that's.
provide a little bit more. Again, like I said, I tried to summarize this so it fit on the slide.
So but we're typically seeing about $30 to $35 million quarterly as it relates to the CFPF Reggie funds from the auctions based on historical.
Yeah, recent auctions, yeah. I
Right,
think
so,
they've been
so
30-ish.
potentially you're going to get another $120 million
I
this
mean,
coming year.
And we haven't projected that just because the auctions are variable. By shifting this to a fiscal year, we think that 78 is probably, whether we commit all of that to the next grant round or not, that is certainly enough to fund the next fiscal year grant round. Additional auctions come in and we can look at where the next round goes.
Okay. Couple other, so just to confirm, and I appreciate this, we've talked about the source of funding for CFPF, and I know there's some controversy around that, and you and I might not agree on this.
I think we'll agree to disagree on that one probably, yeah.
But what I'm hearing you say is a commitment that the Community Flood Preparedness Fund is not going away. The funding source might change.
Right, so the fund and the funding source exist separately. The fund is enshrined in statute. It's able to accept a wide range of funding sources, general fund, for example. So the fund is distinct from the funding source.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I think the other thing that I wanted to ask about, you mentioned in there, you had some comment about Tazewell and Buchanan, the $11 million. Is that coming from any of these funding sources that we're talking about, or is that coming from the general fund?
I believe that is general fund. It's not coming from ours. The previous money, I think it was $7 million, Senator, that was for the last round of flooding in Southwest Virginia.
It was 11.4 for
11.4
Hurley.
Yeah, that for Hurley, that came out of DHCD's end of the pot. It did not come out of DCR's.
Okay.
But my understanding is I think that's general fund dollars, but it's not coming from DCR's end.
So so a lot of what we're talking about is pre-disaster, which I think is a really smart investment. You know the same stats that we all talk about, $1 million in pre-disaster saves you $6 million in post-disaster. But as we talk about what's happening out in Southwest, a lot of that is disaster recovery. And I'm wondering, recognizing that our charge isn't just talking about pre-disaster as it relates to flooding, but it's flooding in general, is there a fund for post-disaster that has been created, literally a rainy day fund? And is that something that is being discussed in this General Assembly, and maybe the $1 billion in surplus should be going into a rainy day fund? Because I anticipate we're going to see, sadly, additional disasters happening throughout the Commonwealth that we're going to be receiving these funding requests where NFIP, FEMA is not going to be able to fund.
So the funding that I'm aware of is what was on the slide. There may be other discussions, but they may involve other agencies, and I've got what I've got in front of me. I apologize.
Understood. Well, I'm going to continue to be on my soapbox for a while, and that is that these are all great funds. These are large sums of money. I mean, quite honestly, this CFPF amount of funding is almost the entirety of the DCR budget. I mean, you're talking about $130 million to DCR's annual budget of $189. These are significant dollars, right? I guess this is a good thing. But we have identified over $40 billion in pre-disaster funding for the Commonwealth, not to mention what's going to happen, who knows, with future rain bombs and precipitation events. So I would just encourage my friends in the General Assembly and the governor and the administration to recognize this is truly welcomed and appreciated, but yet still a drop in the bucket.
Sure. And I think that goes back to our first principle, which is that we're committed to addressing these challenges. We understand that different people have different approaches, and that's okay. And we're happy to have those conversations. But at the end of the day, I think we've all got the same goal. And I think to your point about disaster recovery, to the degree that the working group can help and how we coordinate that as well. I think that's fair game for that group too.
Do we have a sense of when this next auction will happen, recognizing it's only going to happen once a year, apparently?
So the
Or
auction.
not auction,
oh, the
excuse me, the round of grant funding.
So looking at kind of the timing and trying to be reasonable and not kill staff in terms of what we're trying to get out there, we anticipate getting the draft of the grant manual out at the end of Q1. That'll go out for a 30-day public comment period. We would then go back and look at those comments, balance and evaluate, and then the goal would be to have the next round open second half of calendar 23, which is the beginning of fiscal 24 for the state.
And if you have additional auction proceeds, would you potentially increase the amount of funding available?
We haven't set an amount of funding right now. I think
Okay,
yeah.
you just said $78 million.
So-
That's just how much you have to work with.
That's what's there now, backing out all of the line items that I showed.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, Senator Lewis. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, next up, we want to have a little discussion about the writ of the committee going forward. And I think there's a bill kicking around this year from Delegate Bennett Parker and Sarah Taylor with Alexandria is going to talk to us about their ideas.
Good afternoon, evening, Mr. Chairman, Councilman. Yes, Sarah Taylor with the City of Alexandria. And yes, over the last couple sessions, City of Alexandria and several other localities, we've been looking to this body as a venue for a more robust discussion about flooding across the Commonwealth. And originally charged as coastal flooding, last session you all reestablished yourself as recurrent flooding, with the idea of recurrent flooding across the Commonwealth. Recurrent flooding of all kinds, whether that's coastal, riverine, stormwater, and that these are kinds of flooding that impact communities across the Commonwealth. And if this is your charge, and if this is your goal, and that the intention here is to socialize issues, have conversations about opportunities, and then come up with recommendations for legislation or budget or programs or projects that can be done to impact these flooding issues across the Commonwealth, that part of expanding that charge is expanding this, what I call the civilian membership here on this body. The subject matter experts who can be at the table and have these conversations and bring their expertise to the table to help advise the conversation and advise the recommendations that you all are making going forward. And I appreciate the irony of recommending that you expand the membership of a body that has not yet expanded its existing membership. But that being said, I think the idea of recruiting and retaining some additional subject matter expertise on this body would be valuable to the body and to the recommendations that you all make going forward. And we have a draft bill, and we wanted to have this conversation with the body, so it's not something that is seen as happening to you, but rather happening with you. And clearly, that might not be where we are today. But that being said, Delegate Bennett Parker.
Sorry about that.
No problem. This is, we'll get there. But at least if I can't ask permission, at least this is the opportunity to beg forgiveness if with these bills. So Delegate Bennett Parker and Senator Eben have legislation that recommends expanding what I call the civilian membership on the body, and looking at it in sort of a couple places. One is expanding the local government representation. The idea that having additional local government representatives from rural communities that experience riverine flooding and urban communities that experience stormwater flooding, that is truly important to this body to be able to understand the issues in localities and then be able to make appropriate recommendations. In addition, looking at other areas of subject matter expertise when it comes to the impacts of flooding, and whether we're talking about the economic, social, infrastructure, environmental impacts, life, health, public safety, looking to see additional representation from these areas that are impacted by flooding. And I know we've talked about adding the idea of adding, someone who's a certified floodplain manager, someone who is a representative of the development community. We have an environmental representative, we have business community representative looking at public safety, looking at some other areas, and gently expanding that civilian membership. But the idea of bringing additional folks to the table who can help advise what you all are recommending, but also have these conversations at these meetings when the presentations are made and you're really trying to understand what do these really mean? How do they impact communities across the Commonwealth? And what are the recommendations that you all are putting forward and helping to advise, whether it's legislation or policy, programs, budget? Really, that's the opportunity here, is to expand that civilian membership. And we've been working on this. I think this is the third session that I've sort of played around with this. Really hoping to have build a session and understand that we can't have necessarily the blessing of the subcommittee, but at least, again, if I can't ask your permission, I can at least beg your forgiveness, because I tried.
No, I appreciate that, and I think they're all very valid points, and we talked about it last year, and as you know, Senator Evans is my seatmate, so I get an earful from him
Sure.
on it anyway, and certainly look forward to working with you all this session to try and bring about some of those changes, because as I said, I think the points are valid. So, do you have any questions?
Great idea.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. We appreciate it. Look forward to working with you. These bills are always written in pencil at this point, so look forward to working with y'all to figure out the right words and the right combination of folks to bring to the table to have the right conversations and move these efforts forward. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Appreciate y'all.
And the only other item on our agenda is member legislation, which we had hoped to have a more robust attendance from the members. But I can just say, from my own personal standpoint, I've got a bill in that is actually a Chesapeake Bay Commission bill that another version of what we had last year, and what it's going to attempt to do is to require localities to consider resilience in their comprehensive plans as they redo them every 5 years. There is no mandate other than the consideration of resilience. There's no requirement that anything be adopted. And we think we've massaged the language enough this year to alleviate some of the concerns that were raised on the House side after it got out of the Senate. So look forward to pushing that forward. Again, it's Chesapeake Bay Commission bill. It came as the result of a gaps funding analysis that the three states of the Bay Commission did as to their gaps in their policy. And this was one of the things that we identified. We had three bills last year. Two passed, and this one, as I said, ran into some unexpected rough water, but I think we have anticipated the objections, and hopefully we'll get it through this year. So be on the lookout for that. Is there anything else? Any public comment? Anybody have anything they'd like to say? All right. We are adjourned. Thank you all.